Sorry, guys. Okay, we're all good to go? Wow, this is a much smaller audience than I had before. I think everyone wants to know about dashboards rather than anything to do with security or anything like that. They want the flashy, pretty stuff, right? Okay. Hey, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Rob Hawthorne. I am a principal consultant for a company called Prophecy, which specialises in business intelligence solutions. We basically specialise totally in the Microsoft stack. We don't do anything associated with any of those other vendors because they don't offer any real value, right? It's always Microsoft. So basically part of the Microsoft BI stack. What have we got? What tools and technologies are sitting inside that stack, guys? Excel, that's one of them. What else? SQL. What parts of SQL? OLAP, analysis services, yep. PerformancePoint, yep. SSIS, exactly. Right, what else have we got that's part of the SQL Server stack? Reporting services, exactly. And reporting services gives us what? Reports, yep, okay. Do we get two modes of reports out of reporting services? Can you guys tell me what they are? Oh, okay, yep, sorry, I didn't think about that. I was meaning the actual reports. We get two types of reports. Those are just the ones that you write, Wayne. No, we get two types out of reporting services. We get what's known as our corporate or our standard reports, and then we get what was known as ad hoc reporting. So our corporate or standard reports are written by a little developer who goes away and makes them look pretty and does all those sorts of things, and our ad hoc reports are written by our business users and they just want some information. Now, okay, cool. So, but that sort of deviates a little bit from what we want to do. So of all these tools and technologies, the biggest problem we have is making sure that people who are accessing the data are only the people who are allowed to access the data. What we have to do is we actually have to ensure that me as Rob coming in and touching this month's sales data for the Auckland region is perfectly acceptable and that I can't go and look at the Wellington region. Or probably the most interesting scenario is HR data. Everyone gets really, really upset about their pay being known by everyone else. Okay, it's just one of those things, and so of course we've got to make sure that data is well secured. However, our problem is what we end up with is a number of servers involved to deliver all these different services, analysis services and integration services, reporting services, SharePoint, PerformancePoint, Excel services. All those things will end up existing on a number of boxes. Normally 2 to 3, but sometimes up to 4 to 6, depending on how big your environment is and how much you need to scale. Now, I don't know if any of you have been around for long enough to remember the old ASP days. You're developing an ASP, and what you had to do was you had to specify in your connection strings usernames and passwords. Was that good practice? I guess at the time it was. What else could we do? Now, do you know why we had to do that? Sorry? Double hop, that's right. We had the whole double hop problem. And what that is that means our credentials could be passed to the web server, but they couldn't go beyond the web server. They couldn't go anywhere else. So therefore we had to make a connection to the database as a known user. Hence the reason Kerberos came into practice. And so Kerberos is a mechanism that allows us to get around this whole double hop problem. And we'll have a look at that as we go through. So this is our agenda, which is really just to sort of cover off the key points of Kerberos. I'm not going to go into a full in-depth discussion about Kerberos because you guys will all be asleep and it's way too close to TechFest for you guys to start falling asleep, right? So we're just going to cover off the key concepts of Kerberos, and pretty much this entire thing is going to be a demo. I think this is even shorter than my last presentation. This has only got like 4 slides in it, whereas the last one had 6. So I'm really trying to change things up for you guys. Now the problem with configuring Kerberos, does anyone know what the challenge is? It sucks. Yeah, that's probably quite true. But the problem is I can't use a single virtual machine to show this to you. You know, the demo I did earlier for doing the advanced dashboarding stuff was all running on a single machine. Well, that's all using NTLM. And that doesn't mean anything. So what we've had to do is build 4 virtual machines. And you'll see them all running, and I'll show them all to you. And we're going to try and configure Kerberos up. Now, one of the other little issues we have is to make sure that we can get Kerberos to work nicely throughout the environment, is we have to reboot everything. And I don't know if any of you guys have had to reboot machines during the middle of a presentation before, but it's definitely not fun. So my lovely little assistant Steve over here is going to come up and he's going to play a bit of a game with you guys. So it's a bit of a bribe session. So for those of you that came and get to enjoy the benefits of a reboot during the middle of a presentation, you will be bribed and rewarded for it. Because we're not beyond corruption and bribery, that's for sure. So there's really 3 key aspects that we're going to have a look at. We're going to configure SharePoint 2010 for Kerberos. That's the first thing. We're going to make sure that SharePoint is ready to go. Then we're going to configure the SPNs in Active Directory, and we're going to walk through and we're going to tell you what those SPNs are. I'm looking at it from a BI perspective. Okay, if you guys want to look at it from some other perspective, you'll have to go and do some research around the SPNs and what they all mean. And then we'll configure Excel services up. If we have time, we'll do PerformancePoint as we go through. The problem is that this presentation was going to be an hour 15 and we've only got an hour. Okay, so we'll see how we go. Right, Kerberos, why use it? It is the most secure Windows-based integrated authentication mechanism. Okay, there is nothing more secure in the Windows world today than Kerberos. It allows the delegation of our client credentials right from the machine that I log into in the morning through to the SQL server in the back end, so I can see that it's Rob coming in and touching this piece of data. So it passes her credentials all the way through the system. It does this by supporting mutual authentication of clients and servers, so it doesn't matter whether you're on a server or on a client, it'll pass those tickets around for you. It supposedly produces less traffic to domain controllers. I shouldn't say supposedly. And it's also an open protocol. So Kerberos is actually also implemented in the Unix world and the Linux world, but it's very heavily used in the Microsoft world. There is a whole ISO standard, sorry, not an ISO standard. What do they call them, Wayne? I'm going to put you on the spot now. Sorry? Yeah, it's like the 3W or something. What's it? That's it, thank you. Standard that defines what the Kerberos protocol is and how it's to be used. It does have some cons, especially when it comes to configuring SharePoint and Excel services and the associated services. Everybody who's tried to do it when they first try has an absolute nightmare. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, you have to know what your SPNs are. You have to plan this before you begin doing it. If you randomly start implementing SPNs and changing services and all sorts of things, give it up. Start from scratch. Plan it out, make sure you know how the services are going to communicate to each other. Additionally, if you are in generally speaking, a government environment or a banking environment where you've got firewalls between all of the servers, that's going to cause you some problems. So there's a bunch of ports that you need to open, being the Kerberos 88 and 464. Is that clear? Guys happy? Yeah? There's also a couple of things to watch out for. Who's implemented Kerberos recently? Woohoo, a few of you. Okay, on what operating systems?
2004 and 2008.
Okay, so did you have a 2003 web server talking to a 2008 database server?
Actually, other way around.
Other way around will work. Unfortunately, this way around is a problem. The reason why is that in Windows Vista and Server 2008 onwards, Microsoft introduced what's known as AES, or the Kerberos Advanced Encryption Service. And unfortunately, if you've got an IIS server trying to delegate credentials to a Server 2008 machine, it doesn't run in AES mode, so you have to actually turn AES off on the Windows Server 2008 machine. When this first happened, there was no official supported way of turning it off. So Microsoft had to write a hotfix to release out to get that done. It's now supported in R2 to be able to turn it off. Right, basically, this is our little Kerberos overview. So we've got our user who logs onto their PC in the morning. As they log onto their PC, their credentials are authenticated against the domain controller. So it says, welcome Rob, glad to see you here, got your password right. And they issue me a Kerberos ticket, which has a time to live on it. Now that Kerberos ticket normally is about 8 hours. I think by default in Active Directory it's 8 hours. What happens now is when I want to go and request a web page, that ticket or token is passed to the web server. That web server then passes that down to Active Directory and says, is this a valid token? And AD says, yep, or no, it's not. And if it is a valid token, and I now go off and request access to the SQL box, and I have delegated authentication from here to here, then the SQL box will go, oh, you've got a valid Active Directory token, therefore I'm going to accept your request. And it returns the results back. So this process here in the middle with that ticket is now impersonating me when it's going through to the SQL box. It's acting as Rob. Is that all clear, guys? Yep. Then once it gets here, it'll say, no, it's not a valid ticket, so it'll come back and it'll give you a 401 error or whatever the, you need to re-authenticate error is. And once you've got a new ticket, then away you go again. They definitely put a time to live on them, a TTL by default, because otherwise you've got tickets that never expire. And, passwords change and all sorts of things. So, okay. Right, now we're going to get into the meat of it. So, I think I am on switch number 3. Oh. You all see all that? Okay. Right. As you can see, we're running Hyper-V. Wonderful that it is. And it's running on this box here. And we've got 4 images built. All quite well named. So we've got a MOS 2010 server, a SQL 2008 R2 server, a Windows 7 client machine, and a Windows Server 2008 machine. There is one thing that I didn't do here, which is best practice. I know Chan knows what it is, but do you guys know what it is for SharePoint? You're supposed to break the admin console out onto its own machine. You're not supposed to install it on the same box as the SharePoint box. So just ignore that, because I didn't do it. Technically, we should have had 5 machines, but to be quite honest, once we got 4, it was getting a little bit hard to run them all. Okay, so, oops. Oh, that's all bad. We just ran through all the slides in 1 second. Okay, so if we have a look at this, on our Windows Server 2008 R2 machine, this is our domain controller, okay, and it's running a domain called demos.prophecy.net.nz. In here, we have 2 service accounts. We've got a MOS service account and a SQL service account. This is what I mean by when you guys have to start planning it out. You've got to start thinking about the services and how they're going to run. Best practices is that you never run a service inside SQL Server unless it's running under a service account. Why? If it runs under local system, that's a very high privilege, right? It's an administrator on the box. SQL Server, you can actually, and I've seen this done, have it run under a guest account. It's not pretty, but it can be done. Okay? We run SQL Server normally under a standard service account that is just a user on the machine. I've got 1 service account for MOS at the moment. So when I installed MOS, I installed it under that service account. What I have found when I've been installing MOS is that if you actually install it under the service account that you want to run as, i.e. not the administrator, domain admin or anything, things just happen nicely. Okay, so when you try and install MOS under a different user account and then try and change all the services, you get into all sorts of yucky things. Now, I don't know why it happens. I don't know. Maybe somebody who's a bit more of a SharePoint expert can help you out. Go and see Chan. Put your hand up, Chan. Yeah, look, go and see Chan. He'll be able to tell you guys why that happens. Okay. We've also got 3 machines here. We've got our MOS machine, we've got our SQL machine, and we've got our Windows 7 machine. Okay, so let's pop over to MOS, wherever it's hiding. There it is. Oh, go away. Ask me later. And you can see here we've got a standard installation of MOS with a site created called MSTechEd 2010. Now, the one thing I didn't start up was the central admin console. And that will start very shortly. Also, the other thing I didn't start was the report builder URL. And while we're waiting for that one to start, I might as well download that. Oh, that's not good. What happened to our service? Okay, where's reporting services hiding? There it is. It's one thing I'm hoping about MOS is that they speed it up a little for demonstration purposes. How many of you got 2010 deployed in your environment? A few, okay. Just excuse that noise, it's my cell phone ringing. Okay, right, so what we've got here is a standard MOS administration console. And what I just want to show you first before we do any configuration is that this is running as NTLM, because that's always a good thing to make sure that we're doing first. Now, SQL Server is not installed on this box. As you can see, it goes to another one, but I did install the SQL tools, okay?
How are you connecting to that SQL server inside SharePoint? Machine name or SQL alias?
Now, everything I do when I connect, I always use a fully qualified domain name. I find that if you set Kerberos up trying to use NetBIOS names, you'll run into trouble very quickly. What happens in Windows by default is it'll try and connect by NetBIOS, and if it can't connect by NetBIOS, it will default back to the FQDN, or the fully qualified domain name, so always set it up with that. I always use machine names, not IPs as well.
But you're not using a SQL alias?
Not using a SQL alias, no. You could if you wanted to. As you can see, this is our MOS store, because it's got about 1,000,001 databases installed on it. And while it's starting a report builder in the background, everything's running a little slow. So let's just go back to this, and we will open our query that we've got on the desktop there. And it's a pretty easy query. It just checks to see what the host name is and what the authentication scheme it's using. Okay, so you guys can see there that all of the services that are authenticating to SQL are running NTLM. So we're going to create ourselves a little report, which I'm going to go next and create a new data set. And I'm just going to cheat. I like to copy and paste, okay? There you go. And we'll do this against master. Edit as text, and on the desktop, is that the one I want? No. Oh, no, I haven't got that. I haven't got it there. I just have to jump out to the machine and get the query that we need. There it goes. Now we run that little query, and we can see here that our report is going to connect as NTLM. Next, next, finish. Hit run. Okay, all right, or not hit run, as the case might be. Let's just go and save this report on our MOS machine. HTTP. Even when I'm actually saving things into MOS, I tend to use a fully qualified domain name as well, okay? Now I'm starting with reporting services. And I'm starting with this because this tool, or setting this up, is a really good way of debugging what's going on. Okay, because you've got to remember these are all separate services and they're all delegating credentials differently. So we've got reporting services and PerformancePoint server and Excel services. By having reporting services, which is the easiest to configure, up and running first, it means we can prove that Kerberos is working in our environment. And we don't have to then start debugging Kerberos issues. We just know that it's an issue with either PerformancePoint or Excel services. So if I now pop back into this area here, go into my libraries. Come on. Go into my documents. And I run my little report called auth test, which is going to take a little while to fire up. What's going to happen? Sorry? I'm going to see the report. What would happen if I fired that up on the Windows 7 client? That's right. I'd actually get the reporting services would come back and not render the report. Why? Why does it work on the MOS machine but not the Windows 7 client? Single hop. That's right. So we're going straight from the MOS machine to the database server. Therefore, we're authenticating as service MOS. If we tried to do that from the Windows 7 client, they're authenticating to the MOS server, but we're not authenticating to the database server on the back end. What's a good way inside SQL to debug what's actually going on, whether we're getting credentials passed through or not? Anyone here use Profiler? If you fire SQL Server Profiler up against either analysis services or the database engine, you will see the user's NT logon name coming through. If that comes through as NT Authority Anonymous, Kerberos is not working. Okay, so it's a nice simple little tool for validating it. Right, okay, so we've proven that Kerberos is not working in our environment, so let's make it work. Fingers crossed. First of all, we're going to manage the web apps, and we're going to have a look at our SharePoint site. The first thing we need to look at is the authentication providers for this website. If we have a look, I know I'm clicking a little bit fast, so if I'm going too fast, tell me, okay? We have a look in here. We see our web app is set to NTLM, not negotiate. So we're going to change that. And it comes up and says, hey, if you do this, you realize that there's a whole pile of extra stuff you've got to do to make this happen, okay? We say, sure, we know that. We're smart people. That's now going to make those changes to the web app and recycle the IIS service, or recycle that web app inside IIS. Speaking of IIS, there's a couple of things we just need to check that are set inside IIS, okay? So if we go into roles, I always get lost in Server 2008 about where things are hiding. Go into the web server. Wait for IIS to respond. Okay. It's one of those times that I should be patient and let it do its thing. And now we're going to have a look at the MOS site. We're going to look at SharePoint 80, and we're going to just check the authentication mechanisms turned on for that. So, it needs to have Windows authentication enabled and basic authentication disabled. Additionally, we need to, in the authentication, where's the advanced setting gone? There he goes, advanced settings. We need to make sure the extended protection is turned off and the kernel mode authentication is turned off. They are different ways of authenticating and they will not delegate the credentials through if they are turned on. I believe by default when you install SharePoint, they are turned off. Is that right? Yep, okay. So you'd have to specifically turn them on. Sorry? Yeah, don't turn it on. Yeah. Ever. There we go. Wayne says don't turn it on ever. The other thing to check is the providers. We've got to make sure that we have the negotiate provider at the top of the list. So what happens is that when it comes through, it will try that authentication mechanism first. So that's all we need to do in IIS. Other than that, IIS is good and clean. Right, let's go back to our application and just check that that switched to NTLM, to Kerberos, like we wanted it to, and it did. So is that all we need to do? It's all done? Go home now? Right. So that is the basic configuration we need to do for SharePoint. And that is a very basic configuration we need to do for SharePoint. Okay? There's a bit more stuff that we need to do. But, oh, hang on, make sure I can get back to my slide deck. Where were we? There. Right. Right. Now what we're going to do is we've got to add the SPNs, or the server principal names, to Active Directory. They're in a relatively basic format for SQL and analysis services. What we've got is there's a command line utility in Windows Server 2008 called setSPN. The -a means to just add it. There is a -s which will check first to make sure that it's a valid SPN before it adds it. But the -a will work in Windows Server 2003, but the -s won't. Okay, so that's why I've shown you this here. Then what we're delegating is the service. So SQL Server is the MS SQL service. Okay, it's the service name. And then we've got the machine name and the service account. Pretty simple, right? What you can also do is delegate to the port that SQL Server is running on, port 1433. This is very useful when you're doing delegation through firewalls. Who knows how SQL Server works to resolve names? So when I make a connection to a SQL box and I say, give me Rob's demo machine / SQL1, i.e. a named instance, do you know how SQL resolves that name? It does a lookup to what's known as the SQL Server browser service, and the browser service says, oh, Rob's SQL1 is running on port 1499, and it then redirects me to port 1499. So, if you do not use a named port number on the end, you have to include this special service here, which is called the MS OLAP Disco service. And it's not where analysis services goes out in parties. Oh, that was a lame joke. It's for the SQL browser service. That's what does the redirect to the port number. Unfortunately, it doesn't work through firewalls because that port is dynamically assigned. So if you are doing this for a named instance behind a firewall and you're using analysis services or SQL Server, bind them to a specific port. And then you don't need that SPN or that one. Okay? The MS OLAP service is for analysis services. Now there's two versions here. There's the .3 and just the .nothing, or the empty one. And the reason for that is different authentication providers will use different OLADB providers for connecting to the database engine. So Excel will use .3 and PerformancePoint will use .3, but you might have some other application that doesn't know about .3. Finally, the last SPNs we need to set up is for HTTP. So these are allowing us to redirect the web traffic and saying we're allowed to delegate this. You do not need to set that up for, if you're running this over SSL, you do not need to set one up for HTTPS. You only need to do it for HTTP. Are we clear so far? Have we got any questions so far? Because this is the bit that everyone gets wrong. Okay, this is a bit that always goes ugly. Yeah. Okay, yes, sorry. Double all of those. Okay, so put in both NetBIOS and fully qualified domain names. No, you do not need IP address. As long as your DNS is resolving correctly, you do not need IPs. Really? Okay. I've never had a problem with it, but if you wanted to, I suppose you could. So you could triple it. You need it for... Oh, well, need we say more? If you had a real operating system. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the basic format of them. Right, so now we're going to set those up. And like any good cooking show, they have been prepared earlier. Now one of the biggest problems that people have with SPNs is not only do they just randomly assign them, sorry guys, keep only going to number 2, not number 3. Not only do they just randomly assign SPNs, but they don't check to see if they already exist. The biggest problem in Active Directory for configuring Kerberos is that the SPN already exists and it belongs to another service or another machine. Okay? So you need to be very careful when you're delegating these. So there is sorry? No. Case does not matter. Right, so your SPN command, oops, I've written a little batch file that goes and does this. As you can see, we've got the same format going on. We've got the MS SQL service with the NetBIOS name and the service account that we're delegating to. This is why you should run things under service accounts. Okay? Then we've got the fully qualified domain name. Then we've also got port 1433. Now this one here is not needed because of the browser service. But it doesn't hurt to have it if you want to have it. Okay? Does that make sense? The only one that sort of differentiates from that above is this one here. We've got MOS running as, on the HTTP, on the HTTP service. Right. So let's fire that up. Always run it as an administrator. Now, as I was just saying while that's running, in Windows Server 2008, they've introduced a new switch on set SPN called -X, which will check to see if that SPN already exists. It's really, really helpful. Because otherwise, to debug it, you've got to look through event logs, and you've got to try and figure out why delegation's not working. If you're lucky in the event logs, it pops up and it says, duplicate SPN found. Okay? Or if you use the -S switch, it will validate the SPN hasn't been put on there before as well. Right, so this is going through, and it's now registering these service principal names for these particular services, and good old Active Directory format telling us whereabouts that sits in the environment. Right, so those are going to go through and do that. Now, we're almost getting to the crunch time where we're going to have to reboot everything. There's one other really, I wouldn't call it bad practice, but there's one other lazy practice that I did on this MOS machine. Because you can't have duplicate SPNs, I configured reporting services to run under the MOS service account. Now, why would I do that? Other than being lazy. That's right. So what's going to happen is if a reporting services is on the MOS server and they're both using HTTP with the same server name, we're going to have a duplicate SPN, even though they're under different service accounts. Mm-hmm. If you want reporting services to run on the MOS server and run it under a different service account, you need to alias it. So you need to set reporting services up to run as, myreports.prophecy.net.nz or something like that. Okay, so you need to create an alias for it, or run it under a different IP, which is generally best practice as well. Okay, that's still going. So we'll just pop over to the MOS machine while that's doing its thing. And I'll show you what I mean by those service accounts. Is that still open? Yeah, it's still open. Configuration. Sorry, I talk to myself a lot while I'm doing this stuff, okay guys? So that's how I remember where everything is. Reporting services. Where was that? SQL reporting services. There it is. And you'll see there that it's running under demo service MOS. Okay? And most of our others are running under demo service MOS as well. We've got a couple running under Service SQL because that's what they're using to bind to SQL Server in the back end. Okay?
So we're setting this up under effectively the timer service account, or is it because it's the same one, we're actually setting up under the app pool account?
Under the app pool account. Right, let's just check that that's done its thing. No, not quite. Okay, while that's going through, the other thing that we can now do in Windows Server 2008 that we couldn't do previously is in Windows Server 2003 you had to use this command called ADSI edit to go and look at the SPNs that have been added. Well, in Windows Server 2008 you get this wonderful new feature called Show Me the Advanced Features. And on the advanced features, on our service accounts, which one have we done? Oh, we've done both of them. Good. We can now go and have a look at the attributes and the SPNs that have been added to those attributes. There they are. Look at that. All of them in there, just ready to be seen. So we could have done this manually, and we could have typed them in and edited them in this way instead, but it's just as easy to use the command line to do it. Well, personally, I think so. Right, so in the next piece in Active Directory, we now have to say, I know it's hard work, eh? We need coffee in here. The next piece in Active Directory is we have to tell these accounts that they're allowed to delegate to each other. Okay, so what we do is on this MOS service account, we go to the delegation tab, and we're going to be lazy because we're just setting Kerberos up and saying trust this account to delegate to any service, but it's got to be a Kerberos only service. And we go, okay. And I always set it on the SQL one, even though you don't really need to set it on the SQL one as well. So once the service accounts are allowed to delegate, we need to then tell the machines that they're allowed to delegate on behalf of those service accounts. Okay, do you see how I'm going on with all this planning that you have to do up front? You have to know which machines are delegating where. Okay, so you've got to make sure you think about it. The only one that we need to delegate services for is the MOS machine. Why? Sorry? Who said that? It's in the middle, exactly. That's right. So we have to allow that to delegate. Why don't we have to allow the Windows 7 client to delegate? That's where the credentials are coming from. So we don't need to make the Windows 7 machine an actual delegate. And there's no services running on it. Right. This is where we get into the interesting piece. Because now we get to reboot the entire environment. We could just wait for the stuff to replicate through and then, get my train of thought back again. We could just wait for the changes in Active Directory to replicate through, but we don't know when those changes are going to replicate. Now the fact is we've got a single domain controller. It could just replicate right now, or it could replicate in 2 hours or whenever it might be. The other thing is all the services need to be restarted. All the MOS services, all the reporting services, that sort of thing. And what's the best way of doing that? Reboot them, okay? So sorry guys, but this is where we get into the action piece, and my lovely assistant is going to come up and have a chat to you all. Right, we'll start with the MOS one. Let's go restart. Correct. Now, it is different if you have got a large farm and you're delegating a lot of services, especially if you've got a scaled out farm. There's been quite a change between SharePoint 2007 and 2010, because by default now 2010 will use the claims token service. Okay, so SharePoint is Windows claims to token service enabled, but PerformancePoint server and Excel services are not. So we've still got a lot to do to get PerformancePoint to run, but we're going to make reporting services run first. Okay, now there was one other thing I meant to do and I never did it. How slack was that? Was on this machine, which is now restarting, was to create a user account for myself. Oh, I don't want to shut down. What did I do that for? Oh. Lucky it was only the client, eh? And our domain controller is still thinking. So you guys came to a demo just to watch machines restart. How cool is that? Yeah, you're good to go, Steve. Yeah.
So I'm the lovely assistant. And this is a bit I like because I get away, I get a chance to give away before you start. Which is generally the only time people like me. My family. So first of all, who's using PerformancePoint services now, or reporting services, or done anything similar to all this? Okay, cool. How many? I'm trying to find out who I'm warming to. All these gifts go out. Yeah, we use loads of it. Okay, so first of all, when we were looking So first question. All right, so here's what we're going to do. So we're going to ask a question, and I reckon this is probably good. Anyone into games? Games? Mouse here. We've got a webcam. We've got another mouse. So what we're going to do? Oh, we've got an empty plate wrap. So we could be lucky enough to bring that. So what we're going to do is ask you a question, and to be in it to win it, you've got to get past the starting gate. And the starting gate is I just want about 10 seconds. You've got to tell me 3 benefits, and then I know you're not just delaying, just get your hand up and win something. Right? You get to pick. So I want hands up, and I want 3 benefits in 10 seconds. As soon as I point to you, you're out, and I'll go to the next one. 3 benefits of Kerberos, very quickly, but then I want detail. The judge's word is final. So, 3 benefits of Kerberos.
Yeah, it's open, so it'll work across different platforms. It will, most of
10 seconds, out. Next one.
It's less tough than domain control, it's mutual authentication between client and server, and it's the most secure.
Okay, you're in. Okay, but now I need more elaboration. Elaborate on it. I've got the 10 seconds, now you're in it, now I need to be moved.
What's the percentage improvement over Intel here?
What should we probe, sorry?
What's the percentage improvement over Intel here?
Well, performance-wise, no idea.
Anyone? No, I'm going to stick with you. I'm going to stick with
Well,
you. Elaborate.
you're blocking domain controls, you don't get the whole flipping user list bot between the platform and domain controllers. Every time they look at it, every time there's a sync. So they sync both ways, and by proper synchronization, not by
Okay, I think this is being recorded, so if you missed that, the whole flipping user list.
and the
Shot sync. Alright, I reckon that's worth it. What do you reckon, guys?
Yeah, I think he worked hard enough.
The webcam, the gaming mouse, or the wireless mouse?
Yeah, the webcam.
Webcam? Yep. HD webcam? There you go. Congratulations, thank you very much for coming. You've got home now. You've got the sector. Okay, so next question. Next question is, why would I want to consider constrained delegation SharePoint 2010?
You might park that one, Steve. Oh, because we've got absolute silence in the room now. What's what, sir? What's constrained delegation? We might.
Next question.
Yeah, I think we might have to go to the next question, mate.
If you were considering doing business intelligence, who would be your favorite vendor? And why would you consider that? So hands up, you've got 10 seconds. I want 3 points, and then you're in it to win it. Go.
Microsoft, not
Oh, really?
Java-based.
Oh, okay. What's you then?
Not Java-based.
Okay. What else?
Single integrated stack and funding up to all licenses.
Elaborate on this. Single integrated stack.
One technology vendor and not having, for example, Kerberos issues between Windows and Tomcat, Windows and Java, these sorts of things, and it's all one platform. So you've got Excel, you've got SQL on your desktop, you've got your server.
Got document management, got search. Oh, it's all just too exciting. Okay, what do you want?
Outside line.
How do we move that?
Not bad, mate. Not bad. We're just about at the moment of truth. Ding, ding, ding.
Okay. 3 features in PerformancePoint services that you've been wowed with in the release of SharePoint 2010. See it? Oh, no, wow. Go on, there's got to be something you looked at and you go, oh, this is good. Hand at the back. Fine.
Well, decomposition trees, the fact that it was security integrated SharePoint, and 3D trees.
And the decomposition tree?
They rock, eh?
You're all wowed now, aren't you? Here we go.
And they're all written in Silverlight too. Right, let's fire this one up.
Okay, I've got no gifts now, so I'll have to do the lights again. Good to go?
I hope so. I hope so. We're about to find out. Right, so while you guys were busy being entertained by our lovely assistant, by the way, I rebooted all the machines and I created myself a new user account called Rob, and hopefully our MOS site is now back up again and we will be able to go and see something in action. Oh, there's one more thing I've got to do while that's doing that. I've got to give myself permissions inside the data. Otherwise I won't be able to do a damn thing. Now I'm going to do something here that's a little bit dodgy, but it's fine for our demo purposes. My new user account, oops, who currently exists, we'll just delete that. Yeah, sure, whatever. What could possibly go wrong? Because the query that I do actually goes against master, I'm going to make that user account a sysadmin, okay?
So more secure.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Yeah, see, this is what happens when you become lazy and you just make stuff happen, right? And in analysis services, I'm just going to, well, make myself an administrator. Because, of course, you guys do this for your business users, right? You give them full access to everything. You implement all the security, and then they can't see the data they want, so you just grant them additional rights. Okay. So in analysis services, we're now going to give ourselves godlike access. How are we going for time? What time does this session finish? In 15 minutes. Wow, I better be quick. Okay. So if all's going well, now that we've got all the permissions in the world we need, and we just hit cancel there, and we go, oh, now there's one thing on the client that you should definitely do, is take that URL, because we use FQDNs, and we're going to make that a member of our local intranet. You can push this out via group policy. You don't have to do it this way. But does anyone know why that happens? It's got dots in it, that's right. And as soon as it's got dots in it, IE goes, oh, it belongs on the internet. Okay? For some silly reason, and I don't know why this hasn't been done quite yet, is that it doesn't do a lookup first and go, oh, it's a local address, it's fine. So to do that, and the reason we add it to the intranet site, is because the intranet site, by default, on all client machines, is the only one that does an automatic log on in the intranet zone. Otherwise, the users keep getting bugged for usernames and passwords when they go into it. Oh, access denied. See you later, Rob. So we need to go to MOS and give ourselves access. Uh-oh, it's not started. Maybe I should have just stayed as administrator. Trying to be too clever. So, Steve, got any more little quips that you can put in there for me, mate? Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, while we're waiting for that. Constrained delegation. You saw before when I set it up in Active Directory, I said delegate to any service, or delegate to any Kerberos-based service, right? So constrained delegation means to do what? What would you guys think? Oops. That's right, to a specific service. It means to constrain the services that you delegate to. Okay? And we do have to do that for one particular thing. Does anyone know what that might be? Sorry? That's right. It's the Windows to claim part. And the reason for that is because well, actually, I'm not 100% sure, but it's because we have to. So we've just got to do it. No, what happens is that with the Windows to claim service, you're specifying that it has to delegate only to particular services inside it. Okay? So our current configuration will not work for PerformancePoint or Excel. It will for reporting services, but it will not for those two services. And the reason why is that reporting services is basically a standalone component that is just has a MOS wrapper around the outside, even though it's an integrated mode. Right, so now that I've got access to the site, there we go, central admin's up and running, good. How do we get back to the site? Here we go. Let's just check our data connections. And I'll go back and make sure my Win 7 machine, boy, I click around a lot, don't I? Oh, wrong one. Dashboards. No, Libraries. It's in here somewhere, documents. Right, there's our report. And on the MOS box, if we connect here, and we run this again, what should we see? Hey, look at that. All our machines are now all our MOS components are now authenticating as Kerberos-based authentications through to SQL Server. Okay? The NTLM one that you see here, that's SQL authenticating to itself. Okay, so that doesn't matter so much. So we could go, hence the reason that where statement's at the bottom there, where the logon equals that. Right, so we should be good to go. So if we go back here and we go to our library, remember we're on the MOS machine, so our report ran fine last time. So we're going to run it this time and see what that comes back with. And while that one's running, we're going to pop over to the Win 7 machine and we're going to run that one as well. Which one's first? Oh, I can't do them side by side, that would have been nice. So we should see what on the MOS machine? Sorry? Yeah, the report. Yeah, sorry. We should see what should the report say when it comes back. Kerberos for what service account? Yeah, service MOS, that's right. Oh, it's just the way I prefix all the service accounts. I put service first. And this is a moment of truth. Hey, look at that, works on that one. Now let's pop over to our client and see what happens on there. Oh, look at that, it works on our client machine as well. Hey! Kerberos 101. You see why we put this as a 300 level session? There's lots of bits and pieces inside here, okay guys? So now, we know reporting services is delegating our credentials properly. We know that if I went and put a profile trace on there, we would see my user credentials coming through when I ran that report. This will not make PerformancePoint server work. PerformancePoint server still needs a lot of massaging, shall we say. And so does Excel services. So, for Excel, and this is the reason I made myself a admin on the box, was because A, I'm lazy, and B, because it just gave me straight access to the cube. There you go. Look, you can see how new this is. We are now going to make a new connection to analysis services. So SQL 2K8R2.demos. Even in these connection strings, I strongly encourage you to use a fully qualified domain name. Now you guys know that in SharePoint 2010, see Steve, I'm getting there. It's taken me a while, but I'm getting there. In SharePoint 2010, you can publish these connections into SharePoint, and the users, when they go and say, I want to connect to an existing data source, will see them on their machines. There's a small registry key change you need to make on the client machines, and then they will see those. Don't ask me what that is, because I have no idea, but never mind. It's just, I've always found that it's much cleaner. You know exactly where the machines are going to. Now, I implemented Kerberos at a customer site where we actually did cross-domain authentication. And we had to use FQDNs there. And unfortunately, it didn't work as nicely as it should. Okay, cross-domain authentication is really, really ugly, to be quite honest. And constrained delegation, which is what's required for PerformancePoint in Excel, doesn't work in cross-domain. Do you guys know what I mean by cross-domain? We've got an Active Directory DMZ and we've got an internal DMZ and we want to delegate from one to the other. Doesn't work for PerformancePoint server and Excel services. So this will bring us around to a new architecture for putting these things out on the web. I don't know anyone that's planning on publishing them out on the web yet. If you are, I'm pretty sure Steve would want to have a chat with you. Right, let's have a look. So we're just going to do a really basic query here. One that's even nicer than that. And we're going to take this and we're going to publish this into SharePoint. Save and send safe to SharePoint. There we go. Save as. I get a little bit lost in the new stuff. As I said, I'm a bit old and crusty. And I'm having a think. Oh, why did you prompt me? Okay, while that's just thinking that, we'll just pop back into the slides for a sec. Oh, wrong way. There we go. So we can keep up with the slides. These here, I just gave you guys, because I'm sure you get the slides, you'll be able to download them. These are just the queries for checking that that the Kerberos delegation is working. Okay, so there's just this one here, which this is one we put in the reporting service. In the management studio, so that we can see what the services are authenticating as. And this one, the only thing that's different is that it puts the @@ SPID on the end. So it says, tell me what this SPID is authenticating as. So this is the one that we put in the reporting services report to test that it was working. Okay. Right, so there's a sample workbook. There's another one called, oh goodness, what have I done? Auth test. There it goes. Right. Just going to make sure that that uploads to our our SharePoint 2010 environment. Old habits die hard, eh? So if we go back to documents, we should see it there. Wonderful. And if we go to run it, what's going to happen? Yeah, exactly. And the reason it's not going to work? That's right, because we haven't constrained the delegation for those clients. And we haven't also set that claims to Windows token service up. And it's going to come up. Oh, sorry. How you test it, because one of these interesting things that SharePoint does is that it actually gives you a rendered view of the data. How you test it, though, is that you go refresh all connections, and it will turn around and go, sorry, wrong answer, not allowed to. I'm not sure why you get the preview straight away. It's almost like it sort of caches it and then just gives it to you. Okay. So you can force it to do a refresh on that data connection. Right. So let's go and set this Windows to Claim service up that we've been muttering on about for a little while. So first of all, we've got to create a new service account. And I'm going to create a new one called Service Claims to Windows Token Service. There we go. How's that for a name? We want our service accounts to be very explicit in their naming. Good old Microsoft password. Oops. And there's our service account. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go off and we're going to delegate the authentication. Oh, hang on. There's no delegation tab. Now, to enable the delegation tab, you have to set an SPN. It doesn't matter what you set, you have to set one. Okay? You can set a dummy one, and I think in my dummy situation I have one that says... what did I say it was called now? Gosh, I haven't even got it on here anymore. How bad's that? But we can go and set one that looks like set SPN -A SP C2WTS, and it's demos service C2WTS. Claims to Windows Token Service. Yes, there we go. Oops, what did I type wrong? Ah, thank you. No? Yeah, it's that one. It's around the wrong way. There we go. So we can set up a dummy SPN for this machine, okay? Be very careful though what that dummy SPN is that you set up, because we don't want duplicates. Because if we get duplicates, nothing will work. Okay, it's been updated. Now if we go and have a look at that service account, we have a delegation tab. What we have to do now is allow this delegation to be to specified services only. And because we're using claims to Windows Token Service, it has to be for any authentication protocol, okay? Not just standard Kerberos. We are now going to delegate to particular services, which is this one, and also to our MOS one. If you click the expanded tab, you will see that we have all of the SPNs in here, both our standard ones and our fully qualified domain name ones. Okay, if you had IP addresses, they'd be in here as well. The interesting thing is we now have to do the same thing for MOS. So now we've got to go and do trusted delegation for MOS to SQL.
So again, if we were running this with full accounts, that would be on the RAS pool account?
Yes, the IAS app pool. One of the things in MOS is SharePoint is there's 6 services that you can run the service accounts under. It's 6, isn't it, Chun?
Depends on how you set up your service.
Okay.
You only need 3 to start with.
Right. But general best practice is that you run all of those services under their own individual accounts. So you have to actually understand how they're going to do the delegation to each other. So plan it out. Don't just start hacking around, okay? Right. Okay. Now, we also have to make a change inside SharePoint environment. And we actually have to make several changes inside the SharePoint environment. And one of those is that we've got to run Notepad as an administrator. Good old Notepad, the best tool in the world. Now we're going to, this is ugly, C drive, program files, Windows, Identity Foundation, and there's this lovely config file that we've got to go and modify now. Okay, so make sure I type this right, guys. Add value equals WSS underscore WPG, and add value equals demos service claims to Windows Token Service. Aha, thank you. And also missed the closing tag on that one, didn't I? It's nothing like doing really raw demos. You know, we actually have to modify the XML directly inside there in front of the audience. It's a lovely thing to do. Right, okay. The other thing we've got to do is we've now got to go and look at our services that we've got running. So we're going to go to the security tab, which is hiding here. And we're going to configure our managed service accounts. And we're now going to register our new account, which is demos service claims to Windows Token Service, PASS at word 1. There you go. So if you want to know what the backdoor is for most of the Microsoft ones, that's it. Okay, now we've done that, we're going to go into our system settings. As you guys will see, I've got a little cheat sheet in front of me because this is hard to remember. Okay. Manage services on the server. And we're going to make sure our claims to Windows Token Service is started, which is this one here. There you go. Okay, now we have to configure our claims to Windows Token Service to run under that service account, because by default it will just inherit the MOS one that I set up. So we go into our security tab again, configure our service accounts, and we select our claims to Windows Token Service, and we get it to run under that one. just waiting for the services to pop up so that we can have a look at this. And there's our claim to Windows token service. It's running, and as you can see, it's running under our service account that we've just set up. Okay. Right. So now that's the claim to Windows token service. Now we have to configure Excel services. You guys with me so far? You're dying to get out of here? Or you were hoping to say, it's time, is it? Okay. We have to be real quick. Was this my chance to say, oh no, it didn't work, too bad. Just believe me, it'll work. Manage services on the server. Can somebody see that for me? Right hand side? Thank you. And we've got to go to Excel services and make sure that that's running, which is hiding Excel calculation services. It's started, which is good. And we're going to go application management again. And we're going to create application management, sorry. System settings, managed service, application management, managed service applications. There it is, right. And we're going to create ourselves a new Excel services application. Okay, and we're going to call it something amazing like Excel services. And it is going to use our service account here, CTWS, okay? Then the final piece is to set the trusted file locations. Now once again, you guys are not going to follow my bad habits. I did make one small other thing that I alluded to that I did not do, was to publish the connection into SharePoint. So while we're waiting for that to make its changes, oh, whoops, might have taken the site out. Data connections. We're just going to add a new one, which is, can anyone remember what I called that? My favorite configuration tool. Oh, why did I hit browse? I could have just gone upload. Here we go. Okay. Fine, that'll do. Oops. Wrong content type. Oh! It's an Office data connection file, not a PerformancePoint data connection file. Right, there we go. Right, so that should have finished recycling by now. Cool, okay. So now we just click on our Excel services. And we want to set the trusted file locations. And we're going to add our entire site. And all the children to be trusted as well. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to turn off the warn when we want to refresh the workbook. Oops. And tick the trusted data connection libraries and embedded. Because by default, the way that that current worksheet is it's an embedded connection inside it. Oh, cripes. I've lost it. Where did I go? Configure services. System settings, manage services. I feel like I'm rushed. Where's it hiding, Chen? The, oh, there we go, service application. Found it, just took me a bit, that was all. Manage, and now we're going to set up the trusted data connection libraries, which, once again, we're going to set to the entire site. Okay, right. Right, Now the biggest one, of course, is that we want to make sure that this is all going to work. So we're going to restart the Excel services components. Oh, and there was one step. Sorry. SC config C2WTS. All we're doing here is making sure that the claims to Windows token service depends on the cryptographic service. Really? Okay, well we're going to have to pull it then, aren't we? Yep. Not enough time. Sorry guys. We were so close. They're just a wee bit too short for a full implementation. Let's just see if we can get it to work. No, the Excel services hasn't restarted, so I'm sorry, but we're going to have to pull it because the next presenter's coming in. There's two more things to do to make sure that it worked, and that was to restart all the services and to then basically change the Excel connection to use the connection I'd published into MOS, into SharePoint. So I'm really sorry about the time running out, but if you've got questions, I'll be around, well, today and tomorrow, so just come up and see me and we'll see what we can do.